Good evening. Tonight, you're going to do something a little odd. You're going to stare into a medieval mirror. It's not made of glass. Of course, just polished metal, slightly warped and definitely judgmental. And looking back at you as a woman. Or is it you're not sure? The candlelight flickers over her face. She's wearing a gown made of wool and linen, her hands delicate and rough at the same time. And her forehead, good heavens, her forehead just keeps going. It takes you a moment to realize it's not a trick of the light. That forehead is real. It is vast. It is smooth. It is practically architectural. Welcome to the bizarre beauty standards of medieval Europe, where women willingly plucked away chunks of their hair to achieve a higher hairline, one so high that it bordered on baldness. And somehow, this wasn't a joke. It was a serious symbol of nobility, intelligence, and feminine grace. So, how did this all begin? In medieval Europe, especially around the 14th and 15th centuries, the ideal woman was not sexy in the modern sense. She was refined, reserved, ethereal, and absolutely incapable of growing body hair, apparently. Artists and poets of the time were obsessed with a particular look, a woman with an elongated face, delicate features, and a domed forehead that suggested wisdom, virtue, and aristocratic poise. To match these ideals, women took up tools, yes, tools like tweezers, knives, and even abrasive cloths to physically alter their appearance. They plucked not only their hairlines, but also the edges of their eyebrows, the tops of their foreheads, and sometimes even the baby hairs around their ears. Think of it as medieval facial landscaping. It wasn't quick. It wasn't painless. But beauty rarely is when it's being dictated by a monk with a paintbrush and too much free time. But why a big forehead? The answer lies in how the medieval mind viewed the human body. The forehead was considered the seat of knowledge and purity. A high forehead was associated with deep thought, spiritual superiority, and aristocratic bloodlines. If your forehead took up half your face, it meant God had given you extra brain real estate. Modern science may disagree, but hey, don't ruin the moment. If that weren't enough, there was also a fashion element. Noble women wanted to look distinct from peasants, and guess what peasants didn't have time to do? Painfully pluck their foreheads for 2 hours a day. The more time you had to waste on facial alterations, the more status you had. And in a society obsessed with hierarchy, every hair was political. Let's talk technique for a second. You, standing in that dim candlelit room, might be holding a polished brass tweezer carefully crafted and passed down through generations. Or maybe you're using a rough linen cloth dipped in vinegar to burn off baby hairs, which stings more than you'd like to admit. Some even used homemade depilatories made of quicklime and arsenic, yes. Arsenic, which led to burns, scarring, and in some cases, death. But hey, no pain, no prestige. In some circles, women would shave their heads entirely from the crown forward and wear elaborate wimples or headdresses that emphasized their giant, gleaming forehead like it was a prized jewel. You didn't just have a forehead, you presented it with pride, with drama, with intensity. Your forehead could arrive in a room before the rest of you. If you're imagining a world where people walk around looking like they've lost a fight with a waxing strip, you're not far off. And it wasn't just the nobility. This trend filtered into art, religion, and even theater. The Virgin Mary herself, in countless altar pieces, is depicted with an enormous forehead because of course she would embody the perfect divine form. Paintings of saints, queens, and high-born ladies began to look eerily similar: wide-set eyes, tiny chins, pale skin, and an Olympic-grade forehead. If you're starting to suspect that Renaissance artists were forehead fetishists, you may be onto something. But like any trend, this one had its critics. Some priests warned that altering one's appearance was a form of vanity, maybe even sin. There were whispered concerns that too much time spent plucking at your head was a gateway to devilish behavior. After all, if you're that obsessed with your appearance, What else are you hiding? Still, the trend persisted for generations. It only began to fade as other fashions took over, namely, when the Renaissance began ushering in new ideals inspired by classical Greece and Rome. Suddenly, it was okay to have a little hair again. Not a lot. Let's not get crazy. But enough that people stopped voluntarily making themselves look like human light bulbs. Now, lying in your bed, well, sitting up in your medieval bed. Because let's be honest, you're wrapped like a burrito, you start to reflect. You've seen bizarre beauty trends in your own time. Haven't you? Duck lips, tiny waists, ridiculously sculpted eyebrows. You start to wonder how future generations will judge you. Maybe they'll laugh at your contouring, or your obsession with clear skin. Maybe they'll be horrified at the way we inject things into our faces to relax wrinkles. And just like that, you realize the medieval people weren't so different. They were just using what they had to meet an impossible ideal, crafted by culture, shaped by power, and enforced by art. So the next time someone tells you your forehead is too big, smile proudly. You'd be a medieval icon. Now that you've made peace with your massive medieval forehead, it's time to move down the face. Not far, just a little lower. You glance into that same warped bronze mirror, tilt your head slightly, and realize something's missing. Eyebrows. They're just gone. Or maybe they were never there. It's hard to tell. In the dim light of your chamber, you lean in closer. Nothing. A perfectly smooth, uninterrupted expanse of pale skin arches above your eyes. And you didn't lose them in an accident, they were removed on purpose. Because in the medieval world, eyebrows were so last century. Yes. The next logical step after plucking your hairline into oblivion was to erase your eyebrows entirely. And not just pluck them, some women shaved them, singed them with candles, or used concoctions made from walnut oil or even quicklime to burn them away. A bold move, certainly. A beautiful one. Well, that depends on who you ask in the 15th century. So, why the anti-eyebrow agenda? It's complicated and surprisingly philosophical. To medieval minds, the ideal woman was as blank and calm as a canvas. She wasn't supposed to look expressive. Emotions, especially passionate ones, were messy. They made your face move in all sorts of inconvenient ways. And do you know what part of the face is really good at showing emotion? Eyebrows. They arch when you're surprised. They furrow when you're angry. They rise when you're amused, and droop when you're tired. In other words, they make you look alive. And that, unfortunately, wasn't fashionable. The more you resembled a saint in a stained glass window, emotionless, serene, slightly otherworldly, the more attractive you were. If you ever wondered what it's like to be described as angelic, while also looking slightly undead, welcome to medieval glam. Instead of defined brows, some women painted on a faint line barely a suggestion of where the brow used to be. Others skipped that step entirely. And don't forget, this wasn't just a style for the rich. Women in merchant families, minor nobility, and even upper servants mimicked these trends as much as they could. Beauty wasn't just about looks, it was about aspiration. If you couldn't marry a duke, at least you could look like someone who might. You can imagine the scene: a young woman sitting by a window, plucking each individual hair with trembling hands. She grimaces, but doesn't stop. Across the room, her sister is holding up a polished mirror and muttering prayers not to ward off vanity, but to avoid ripping off half her skin with the lime paste. Outside, someone is selling roasted chestnuts, and a man walks by muttering something about the end times. Just another Tuesday in 1421. What's even more ironic, men were not held to the same standards. While some male nobles trimmed their beards or styled their hair, very few removed their eyebrows. In fact, a thick, masculine brow was often praised as a sign of virility and authority. But women, the smoother, the better. A woman with bold brows might as well announce she had opinions, and that just wouldn't do. There were other, subtler reasons behind the no eyebrow trend. Religious art, for one, played a huge role. In paintings of the Virgin Mary and other holy women, artists deliberately smoothed out the features. Eyebrows were omitted to emphasize spiritual purity. When the most admired woman in Christendom has no eyebrows, you better believe everyone takes notice. But not everyone went along with this. Some critics, often clergy, began to speak out against extreme grooming. They argued that altering your God-given face was a form of vanity or even deceit. There were whispers that women who removed their brows were trying to seduce men or disguise their true emotions. One monk wrote that the brow is the mirror of the soul, a poetic way of saying, "Stop shaving your face, you heretic." Still, the trend held strong for over a century. And as fashion shifted, so did the shape of the painted or drawn-on brow. Some were curved like the moon, others were flat and wide like the horizon. But always, the natural hair was gone, as if it were offensive, as if realness itself was unbecoming. Let's fast forward a bit. You blink still browless, and imagine walking into a modern beauty salon like this. You'd probably get a concerned look. Someone would recommend microblading. Another person might start filming you for TikTok. But in 1450, you'd be the picture of grace. You might even be asked to sit for a portrait. And if you're really lucky, a wandering poet might write a sonnet about how your face shows no mark of the world's turmoil, which is a flowery way of saying you have no eyebrows. I love it. You sit back in your medieval chair, wool blankets bunched at your knees. The room is quiet, save for the popping of the fire and the soft scratching of a mouse in the thatch. You can't help but smile. Because even though the trends have changed, eyebrows are now big, bold, and laminated, the absurdity remains. Beauty has always been weird. It's always been painful. And it's always been temporary. So don't pluck your brows. Or do. Just remember 600 years from now, someone will laugh at both. Let's move down your face a little more, shall we? You glance at your reflection again, still warped, still judgmental, and notice that your skin, well, it's practically glowing. But not in a healthy, modern highlighter kind of way. No. Your skin looks like it's made of cold milk, uncooked dough, or maybe even marble. It's that pale. And in medieval Europe, that's exactly what you wanted. Because back then, pale skin was the ultimate flex. You see, to be truly pale in the Middle Ages wasn't just a sign of beauty. It was a sign of class, of wealth, of holiness. Even if you were ghostly pale, it meant you weren't toiling in the sun. You weren't digging up root vegetables or herding sheep. You were inside writing letters, sighing dramatically, or praying in Latin while wearing 12 layers of linen. You had servants. You had status. You had zero vitamin D. In short, looking half dead was all the rage. But here's the thing, not everyone was born with alabaster skin. And so, just like today, people got creative. Enter the medieval makeup routine. Step 1, cover your face in white stuff. The more unnatural, the better. One of the most popular recipes included a combination of vinegar, egg whites, white lead, and chalk. Yes, lead. As in, the stuff that poisons you slowly while giving your cheeks that nice chalky finish. But at the time, nobody really understood the side effects like organ failure, madness, or, death. Instead, they just saw it as that nice Duchess glow. Some beauty guides even recommended crushing pearls or alabaster and mixing the powder with rose water to make the skin fair and clear. If that sounds expensive, that's because it was. Which, of course, only made it cooler. In medieval logic, if something could kill you and only the rich could afford it, it was probably fashionable. But wait, there's more. Not content with just being pale, medieval ladies wanted their skin to look translucent. So what did they do? They painted on veins. Little blue ones, often on the temples or the chest, to create the illusion that their skin was thin enough to see through. Because nothing says goddess of beauty like looking one hemoglobin short of fainting. And if your veins were naturally visible, congratulations. You were probably cold, iron deficient, and deeply admired. Let's pause for a moment and picture this. You're sitting in your candlelit chamber. Your face painted a pale white with maybe a subtle greenish undertone side effect of the lead. You've got soft blue lines running like vines along your temples. Your lady's maid is carefully dusting your neck with finely ground bone powder. In the background, a minstrel is singing something melancholy in a minor key. And your husband is off somewhere trying not to die of dysentery. And you are a beauty icon. What's truly fascinating is how this idea of paleness linked directly to morality. A woman with fair skin was assumed to be pure, chaste, godly. The whiter the skin, the cleaner the soul, at least according to medieval poets, who were clearly projecting. If you looked flushed or suntanned, people might assume you were of a lower sort, or worse, that you had passions, which, as you can imagine, was quite the medieval scandal. Men weren't entirely off the hook either. Pale skin on men, especially young nobles and scholars, was seen as a sign of refinement, a tan. On the other hand, that meant you were probably a soldier, a farmer, or someone who owned fewer than 3 books. Tragic. But not everyone agreed with this ghostly ideal. In parts of Southern Europe, especially around the Mediterranean, beauty standards varied. Richer complexions and darker hair were more acceptable or even admired. Still, in the high courts of England and northern France, the pale look reigned supreme. Some queens were famous for their snowy appearance. They were praised in poems for having skin whiter than milk and more delicate than porcelain. If that sounds a bit creepy, it was. And the men writing those poems, most of them hadn't seen a woman up close in a while. So, what happened if your skin was naturally ruddy? You covered it up. You might apply a foundation paste made from Cirrus, another lead-based nightmare, or wear veils and wimples to keep the sun off your face at all times. Sunlight became the enemy. Outdoor activities were suspect. Even embroidery near a window could be dangerous to your aesthetic. You imagine the paranoia. A single freckle could tank your marriage prospects. And let's not forget the medieval beauty hacks that make modern influencers look tame. Some women bathed their faces in urine, animal or human. Dealer's choice because they believed it whitened the skin. Others used leeches to drain just enough blood to achieve a delicate pallor without actually collapsing. If that didn't work, you could try mixing pigeon droppings into your cream for extra radiance. Just a touch. Not too much. You're trying to impress a baron, not start a plague. Of course, like all trends, this one eventually faded. The Renaissance brought a renewed love for naturalism, for rosier cheeks and healthy-looking bodies. But for a good few hundred years, beauty was about looking as close to death as possible without actually dying. And here you are now, lying in your medieval bed, still sitting up like a well-dressed mummy and wondering just how people convinced themselves that looking ill was the goal. Then you remember your own world, the filtered selfies, the no makeup, the skincare routines with 17 steps and snail slime. And suddenly, you don't feel so far away from 1450 after all. In fact, maybe you'd fit in just fine. All you need is a little chalk, a little lead, and just enough blue paint to make your temples look medically concerning. So now you've got your forehead high, your eyebrows vanished, and your skin so pale it could be classified as spectral. But you're still not finished. Oh no, because in the world of medieval beauty, it wasn't enough to look like you'd never seen the sun. You also had to look like your skin was made of porcelain and maybe cracking. The final touch, those delicate, hand-drawn blue veins and a generous puff of chalk dust. Let's talk about those veins first. You might think veins are something people try to hide. Not in medieval Europe. In fact, visible blue veins, especially around the temples, neck, and chest, were a highly desirable feature for women. Why? Because they gave the impression that your skin was so thin, so fine, and so untarnished by labor that your very blood showed through like you were a walking piece of glass. And this wasn't just some niche aristocratic thing. This was widely admired. Poets wrote about it. Painters captured it. Courtiers whispered about it in candlelit halls. Blue veins were soft. They were poetic. They were delicate. They made you look like a fragile vase that might shatter if touched by a coarse peasant finger. So, of course, women began painting them on. You sit in your candlelit chamber again, a small tin of crushed woad or lapis lazuli at your side. Using the tip of a brush made from goose feather or boar hair, you draw fine, curving lines along your chest and collarbone just enough to be seen when your dress dips slightly. Maybe a tiny one near the temple, to peek out from under your coif. If anyone asks, it's natural. You definitely woke up like this. Of course, the irony is that many women who were actually pale enough to show their veins were probably not well. Anemia, malnutrition, or even mild plague exposure could give you that faint, bluish tone. But as always in beauty, reality is messy, and illusion is everything. Now, let's talk chalk dust. Today, powder is about setting your makeup. In the Middle Ages, it was about completing the illusion. After applying a mixture of vinegar-soaked bread paste, egg whites, and lead, of course, you'd finish it off with a dusting of white chalk. This wasn't your average sidewalk chalk. This was finely ground calcium carbonate, sometimes mixed with crushed oyster shell or powdered bone for that extra shimmer. Yes, shimmer. You were aiming to look like a haunted statue, not a living woman. The powder served two purposes: to matte down the greasy appearance left by heavy creams, and to enhance the moonlight glow effect that was all the rage in upper-class courts. Think of it as the medieval version of a beauty filter. You, but powdered, polished, unreal. And here's where it gets wild. Some upper-class women would intentionally avoid facial expressions so their makeup wouldn't crack. Smiling dangerous. Laughing risky. Expressing any sort of human emotion. Not worth ruining the powdered masterpiece you spent 2 hours applying. So there you are, walking through a chilly castle corridor with your expression locked somewhere between serene and quietly dying. Chalk dust wafting like flour from your hairline, and tiny blue veins glinting in the torchlight. You are a vision. You are a work of art. You are also slowly being poisoned. But that's beside the point. You might ask, was this only for special occasions? Not necessarily. While the most dramatic makeup routines were saved for feasts, dances, or appearances at court, many noble women kept a low-key version for daily life. In fact, the pressure to maintain the illusion of effortless beauty was constant, especially if your status and your family's reputation depended on it. Medieval beauty wasn't just personal, it was political. Because if your skin was pale and smooth and veined just right, it meant your household was well run, that your marriage was good, that your bloodline was pure, that you were virtuous, disciplined, and properly feminine. One crack in your powder, and the gossip could begin. Was she sick? Was she poor? Was she gasp lazy? In this way, blue veins and chalk dust became a kind of armor, not made of steel or chainmail, but of appearance. And just like armor, it was heavy, cumbersome, sometimes fatal. There were consequences, of course, over time. The lead in your face paste could cause sores, nausea, and neurological issues. Women with lead poisoning often lost hair, teeth, or even the ability to concentrate. But since medical knowledge was still sketchy and makeup was homemade, many didn't connect the dots. They just assumed they were cursed, or sinful, or suffering for their beauty, as good women should. The sad irony, the more a woman committed to the full look, plucked, painted, powdered, the more she might be admired at court, but the more she risked slowly killing herself in the process. And no one really stopped her. If anything, she was praised for her commitment. You sit back in bed still upright, still swaddled in wool and exhale through your chalk-covered nose. You wonder how people could go so far for beauty. Then you remember tanning beds, tooth veneers, rib removal. You realize the game hasn't changed, only the equipment. You lie there, powdered and veined, thinking how strange it all is. And yet, if someone told you tomorrow that visible veins and matte skin were suddenly trending again, would you resist? Or would you reach for the chalk? You're nearly there. Your forehead is vast. Your brows are gone. Your face is painted with chalk and ghostly veins. But something's still off. Your hair. It's brown, or black, or red. Whatever the natural shade is, it's just not golden. And that's a problem. Because in the courts of medieval Europe, especially in Italy and France, blonde was everything. Not just beautiful, divine. To be blonde in the 14th and 15th centuries wasn't just about looking pretty. It was about looking holy. Blonde hair was the color of saints, angels, and every Virgin Mary in every illuminated manuscript. Artists didn't paint Mary as a brunette. She was nearly always given flowing, sun-kissed, buttery waves. That wasn't just aesthetic choice. It was spiritual branding. Blonde meant purity, innocence, ethereal radiance. And if you didn't come by it naturally, you made it happen anyway. You sit now at a low wooden table beside a tiny open window, peering into a small bowl of murky yellow liquid. It's a mix of saffron, alum, lye, and goat's urine, the medieval equivalent of a salon lightener. You dip a cloth into the bowl and begin the ritual of soaking your hair under the sun, carefully coiling it onto the wooden frame of a solana, a sun-bleaching halo worn on the head like some kind of torture crown. You're basically solar charging your hair. The process takes hours, days, sometimes weeks. But by the end of it, you might be rewarded with the color of ripe wheat, a tone so admired it was called biondo angelico in Italian. Angelic blonde. Yes, that was an actual term. And you weren't alone. Countless noble women followed similar routines, turning their courtyards into makeshift tanning salons, but just for hair. Of course, the results were mixed. Sometimes you ended up with blonde. Sometimes you ended up with orange. Sometimes you ended up with brittle hair that broke off in clumps and made your scalp burn for days. But the idea of golden locks was worth the risk. Because to have blonde hair was to rise a little closer to heaven, or at least to attract the attention of someone who owned land. And don't even think about wearing your hair down unless it was perfectly prepared. Married women typically wore their hair covered with wimples, veils, or braided up into structured coils under jeweled nets. But maidens, they had a little more freedom. Unmarried girls might wear their golden hair loose during festivals or holy days, letting it shimmer in candlelight while everyone whispered behind their hands. Blonde hair wasn't just admired, it was talked about. It was rumored. A well-maintained set of blonde locks could elevate your social standing faster than a dowry. And if your hair couldn't be lightened, you faked it. Wigs and hairpieces made from the cut hair of actual blondes were popular, especially among older noble women, or those suffering the effects of too much chalk, lead, and arsenic. Some wealthier women even imported blonde hair from Scandinavia and Germany, where fair-haired peasants were ironically chopping off locks for coins while the nobility glued them to their scalps. Beauty, as always, was a bizarre market. Even men were not immune. While men weren't expected to bleach their hair, poets often waxed lyrical about their blonde-haired lady loves. A courtly love poem without the phrase golden tresses was considered emotionally bankrupt. Men were taught to fall in love with blondes not necessarily because of the hair, but because of what it symbolized. A man who loved a blonde loved virtue, purity, light, even if that light came from goat urine and sunlight. But let's not pretend this was a unified standard across all Europe. In many regions, especially in Spain, Eastern Europe, and parts of Germany, dark hair was equally praised, and sometimes even seen as more passionate or mysterious. There were contrasting ideals at play. Blonde was for virgins and saints. Black was for seductresses and queens. But in the high Gothic heart of Western Europe, the blonde obsession persisted. You sigh, reclining once more in your upright medieval bed, your scalp itchy from all that bleaching, your hair slightly crunchy. But you did it. You achieved the look. And for a few moments, you're the very image of idealized femininity, pale as a pearl, blank as a fresco, and haloed in gold, until you start coughing from chalk inhalation. But even then, even as you wheeze slightly into the linen sleeve of your nightgown, you can't help but marvel at how far people were willing to go to meet the ideal. You remember modern days, modern sprays, modern salons, and you realize nothing has changed. Bleach is still bleach. Beauty still burns. And whether you're in 1453 or 2025, someone's always out there microwaving their hair for love. You're almost done. You've bleached your hair to angelic brilliance. Your forehead is gloriously barren. Your face is dusted like a pastry with chalk and laced with dainty blue veins. But something is still missing. You lean closer to your warped medieval mirror, squint through the candlelight, and realize you look dead. And not in the fashionable, fainting maiden way. No, you look clinically unwell. It's time to bring yourself back to life just a little. Enter the rouge. In the Middle Ages, rouge wasn't just for cheeks. It was for lips, earlobes, and sometimes the tips of the fingers anywhere that needed a little flush of warmth to suggest yes, I still have a pulse. But like everything else in medieval beauty, getting that rosy glow involved some pretty unusual and occasionally revolting methods. Let's start with the basics. You, sitting in your chamber with your goose feather brush and your small wooden box of rouge, might be using something made from crushed red roots, berries, or wine sediment. The most common ingredient, madder root, ground into powder and mixed with animal fat or egg yolk to form a paste. You dab it onto your cheeks, your lips, and if you're feeling theatrical, your ears, because what noblewoman doesn't want pink ears? But of course, that's the nice version. If you're a little more adventurous or just richer, you might have access to vermilion. This brilliant red pigment made from mercury sulfide was vibrant, long-lasting, and incredibly toxic. But it gave you the kind of bold red that said, I don't work in the fields, I might not even be capable of lifting a spoon. A great look, if you're willing to lose a few brain cells. Some recipes were creative. One surviving beauty manual suggests using a paste of sheep bladder, cinnamon, and alum to create a natural blush. The instructions are vague. Do you cook it? Do you dry it? Do you cry while applying it? But the point is clear. Beauty was serious business. Messy, smelly, medieval business. Lips were given the same treatment. Though subtle, a gentle red stain on the lips was a mark of youth and vitality. To achieve this, women used things like cochineal beetles imported at great expense, or beet juice, or if they were particularly daring, vinegar mixed with lead flakes. Because if it didn't burn a little, were you even trying? And here's the thing, medieval makeup wasn't meant to look like makeup. This was not Elizabethan drama or 18th century face paint. The goal here was subtle deception. You were supposed to appear naturally flushed, like you just come in from a refreshing breeze or a demure giggle at court. If someone could tell you were wearing rouge, you'd failed. But if someone whispered, she looks so healthy, so pure, so alive, then congratulations. Your toxic blend of root paste and animal secretions had done its job. Of course, not everyone approved of rouge. In fact, the church hated it. To them, painting your face was not just vain, it was a spiritual crime. By changing your appearance, you were lying about God's design. Some preachers even claimed that painted lips were the gateway to hell, which is an impressive accusation for something made from mashed berries. Worse still, women who wore makeup could be accused of witchcraft. Why else would a woman look young and radiant during a time when most people aged like overcooked bread? Clearly, she had made a pact with something sinister. There were actual sermons about this, entire treatises. Priests had charts. Still, rouge persisted, because even the most devout had to admit it worked. When your skin looked like ivory and your lips like roses, people noticed. You stood out in the torchlit gloom. You caught the eye of a nobleman, a merchant, a bishop's nephew with land. Even if he suspected your glow came from a sheep bladder stew, he might still lean in and say something poetic about your lively countenance. And of course, just like today, men benefited too. No, they didn't wear rouge openly, but they admired it, wrote songs about it, fell in love with it, and expected it, all while pretending they had no idea it wasn't natural. Some things never change. You adjust your woolen blanket around your shoulders, still sitting upright like a perfectly composed doll, and imagine your rouge fading in the firelight. You wonder if anyone in 1450 knew what they were doing, or if, like you, they were just following the beauty rituals handed down by older women, whispered from one generation to the next. Keep your skin white, your lips red, your emotions hidden, and your blush just shy of believable. The absurdity of it makes you smile. Your painted lips crack just a little. Because maybe that's the real curse of beauty across the centuries, not the lead or the mercury or the sheep innards, but the pressure to look effortless while trying so hard. And it's not over. You've still got to do something about that nose. You sit there half angel, half alchemy experiment, your cheeks delicately flushed, your lips berry red, and your forehead so vast it might have its own barony. But now your attention drifts to something else, something long ignored in the pursuit of medieval glamour, your neck. Ah yes, the medieval neck. In an era obsessed with faces that resembled religious icons and skin that could rival snowdrifts, the neck emerged as a surprise celebrity. But not just any neck. A long neck, a graceful, swan-like, elongated neck that suggested delicacy, nobility, and a certain upper-class fragility, as if your head were so heavy with virtue and poetry that it required an elegant pillar to support it. This wasn't just admiration, it was obsession. Poets wrote entire verses comparing women's necks to ivory towers, alabaster columns, and shafts of moonlight. Illuminated manuscripts depict ladies whose necks were clearly not the result of normal human anatomy, but rather the dreams of a monk who spent too much time painting saints and not enough time looking at actual people. And women, they leaned in hard. But how do you elongate a neck that's, well, fixed to your spine? Fashion to the rescue. You slip into your coat hardy, a tight-fitting gown designed to shape the torso and push the bust slightly downward, creating the illusion that the neck rises higher. Around your neck, you wrap a gorget, not the armor kind, but a thin, translucent piece of fabric that delicately hides the base of your throat while allowing the neck itself to peek out and appear even more vertical. If you're wealthy, the gorget might be embroidered with silk. If you're extremely committed, it might be starched so stiffly that turning your head becomes a dangerous endeavor. Hair is also strategically styled. Tight braids are pulled back and coiled behind the head, exposing the neck in its full glory. Jewelry is minimal or positioned to draw the eye upwards. Necklaces rest at the collarbone, not dangling down like a modern choker, because the last thing you want to do is shorten the visual line. And posture, absolutely critical. You practice sitting with your chin slightly lifted, eyes soft, shoulders back. Think, I'm not even aware I have a neck. It just happens to be perfect. Even while embroidering, you're trained to keep your back straight and your head poised like a living sculpture. Don't hunch, don't lean. And heaven forbid you ever rest your chin on your hand in public. That's how peasants behave. But some women went even further. Historical records suggest that a few ambitious fashionistas used devices, yes, devices to stretch their posture. Collars made of stiffened leather or even wood were worn under garments to force the head upward. They weren't exactly comfortable or breathable, or, let's be honest, sane. But if it meant you looked like a noble crane instead of a compact duck, it was worth it. The irony, the long neck may have begun not with beauty but with illness. Some scholars believe that the admiration for elongated necks stemmed from how certain illnesses like tuberculosis created a naturally gaunt, delicate look, including prominent clavicles and a stretched appearance. Over time, what began as a sign of suffering was rebranded as an aesthetic. This is a recurring medieval theme sickness repackaged as chic, and of course, religion had a role to play. In medieval paintings, saints and angels often had long, graceful necks that tilted ever so gently as they gazed heavenward. Women copied this tilt, head inclined slightly to the side, a gentle smile, an air of piety combined with ethereal detachment. It was part devotional, part flirtation, and completely rehearsed. But not everyone could keep up. A short, strong, sunburned neck marked you as someone who probably shouted at sheep. It meant you lived outside, carried water, and maybe had actual muscles. None of that was fashionable. You couldn't just buy a new neck, but you could hide it, pose it, and reshape how others saw it with fabric, posture, and a lot of effort. You sit now in your upright bed, wool blankets tucked around your waist, spine straight, chin lifted ever so slightly. You're not just resting, you're displaying. And somewhere deep in your body, your modern muscles are screaming from the effort, but you don't lower your head. That would be defeat. That would be real. And real doesn't photograph well in tapestries. You begin to realize just how much of medieval beauty was about transformation, not into something glamorous, per se, but into something otherworldly, unreal, serene, distant. It's not about looking sexy, it's about looking unattainable. That's the true beauty currency of the Middle Ages. Because the ideal woman wasn't supposed to laugh too loudly, move too quickly, or show too much passion. She was supposed to sit, observe, and radiate quiet perfection like a swan on a mirror, or a really lovely ghost. And what better ghost than one with a neck you could draw a cathedral on? So, your face is painted, your hair bleached, your neck stretched like you've been in finishing school since birth, but when you stand up, something feels off. You glance down, your feet. Oh no, they're practical, balanced, possibly even functional. Disgusting, because in the realm of medieval beauty, particularly in the courts of France and Italy, there was one more quirk to chase tiny feet. Not just small feet, delicate, dainty, almost ornamental feet. Feet that suggested you had never worked a day in your life and wouldn't even know how to step into a puddle if one attacked you. Yes, this obsession predated modern foot fetish marketing by centuries. In medieval culture, especially in late Gothic and early Renaissance Europe, the size of a woman's feet became a symbol of elegance and, more crucially, status. It had nothing to do with walking and everything to do with not needing to walk. If you had a carriage, or better yet, a stable of horses and several footmen to carry you, then why would you need full-sized, fully functional human feet? Exactly, this led to what might be the most impractical footwear trend in medieval fashion, the poulain. The poulain was a long, pointy shoe that looked like someone had taken a regular leather shoe and attached a small ski to the front. These pointed toes extended sometimes up to 2 feet in length, curving slightly upward at the end like a curly fry that hated you. The nobler you were, the longer your points, because you weren't going to be trudging through mud or manure like some commoner. But here's the secret, they were fake small feet. The actual foot was hidden somewhere way back in the heel section. The exaggerated toe was all for show. Think of them as the medieval version of stiletto heels, uncomfortable, impossible to run in, and completely unnecessary for anything resembling a real life. And yes, men wore them too. In fact, poulain competitions got so ridiculous that sumptuary laws had to be passed in some cities limiting the length of the toes. Some edicts allowed knights and squires a mere 6 inches. Nobles could go up to 12. Clergy, no pointy-toed shoes for you. Jesus wore sandals, not daggers on his feet. Still, noble women did their part. While their poulains may have been slightly shorter, they were often more fragile, made from soft velvet or embroidered silk. And under their gowns, layers of cloth wrapped around their feet to keep them looking small, dainty, and unblemished. Walking was discouraged. Standing for too long, risky. And running absolutely forbidden unless the castle was literally on fire. In some regions, particularly among younger noblewomen, foot-binding-like behaviors began to appear, not the full-on practices seen later in imperial China, but methods of compressing the foot using tight wrappings or soft, curved shoes designed to shape the foot over time. The result, a high arch, a narrow silhouette, and hopefully, a suitor too distracted by your powdered neck to notice your limp. Even the way a woman moved was part of the performance. Gliding was ideal. Floating, if you could manage it. You weren't supposed to stride with purpose, you were supposed to be a living statue, drifting across the floor like a dream with ankles so fragile they might snap from a well-placed compliment. But and this is important, not everyone could afford such graceful uselessness. Peasant women had actual work to do. They wore wooden clogs or heavy leather shoes, designed for walking, hauling, and survival. Their feet were large, wide, sunburned, the very opposite of noble femininity. This, too, fed the fantasy. If your feet looked nothing like a servant's, you must be something better, cleaner, closer to heaven. And like all beauty trends, it wasn't just about the feet, it was about what the feet said. Small feet implied you lived indoors, that you were protected, that your body had not been used for labor, only admired. A noblewoman with tiny shoes was seen as the embodiment of purity, restraint, and decorative value, like a porcelain doll someone forgot to lock in a cupboard. Which leads to a dark little truth: medieval beauty was less about beauty and more about uselessness. The more useless you appeared, the more valuable you became. You didn't chop wood, you didn't dig, you didn't sweat, you didn't walk too far, you didn't do anything, you simply were. You lie back now, still upright, still regal, your chalk-covered face staring into the ceiling beams, wondering what your modern sneakers would say to all this. They'd probably scream, but you understand it now. This whole system of elegance and illusion, of face paste and foot pain, you're starting to see the logic. Because in a brutal, muddy world full of war, plague, and goat-based drama, beauty wasn't just vanity. It was escape. So the next time someone complains about fashion making no sense, show them a picture of Poulain's, and then ask them how long are your shoe points you've survived the chalk, the rouge, the vinegar urine hair treatments, and the toe-stabbing shoes. You've plucked, powdered, and posed your way into the upper echelons of medieval elegance. But there's one last thing that could ruin the entire illusion: your teeth. You open your mouth to smile at the tapestry. A quiet breeze blows through your chamber. A pigeon coos outside. And then, oh no, you remember this is the 15th century. Dentistry is still mostly a rumor. Because if there's one area where medieval beauty standards get suspiciously quiet, it's dental hygiene. Let's be honest, you weren't expected to have perfect teeth. In fact, you weren't really expected to show them. Portraits from the time featured tight-lipped smiles, or no smiles at all. Not because people were grumpy, but because teeth were kind of terrifying. Most were crooked, some were black, many were missing, and almost all of them hurt. The medieval mouth was a battlefield and your smile a war wound. Tooth decay was rampant, especially among the rich. Why? Because they could afford sugar, imported sweets, candied fruits, honeyed cakes, all signs of wealth, but also all very good at rotting your teeth. Meanwhile, peasants eating barley and onions might have had better molars purely by accident. So, what did people do about it? Surprisingly, quite a bit. Medieval texts actually contain early versions of dental care tips, though they were more about odor than orthodontics. Mouthwash recipes included mint steeped in vinegar, rose water mixed with cinnamon, or brace yourself rinsing with wine, followed by chewing fennel or cloves, a spicy, boozy mouth rinse. Honestly, not the worst. If your breath was really offensive, and it often was, you could carry herbal sachets or chew on scented twigs, sometimes made from willow, licorice, or even dried orange peel. Noble women were known to suck on pastilles made from aniseed and honey, which masked the stench and suggested delicacy. It wasn't dental care, it was dental camouflage. And if you were particularly vain or particularly brave, you might try to whiten your teeth using crushed coral, burnt rosemary, powdered pumice, or even ground bone. That's right. Toothpaste that could sand furniture. If that sounds painful, it was. Many of these abrasives wore down the enamel until your teeth were smooth, flat, and prone to spontaneous cracking. But the goal wasn't necessarily to have perfect teeth. It was to have a pleasant mouth, one that didn't smell like your chamber pot, one that suggested you were gentle, refined, and vaguely floral like a walking bouquet who occasionally coughed up blood. This is where perfume mouths come in. Yes, that was a thing. In high courts, especially in Italy and southern France, it became fashionable for women to scent not just their skin or clothes, but their breath. Recipes included rinses made with violets, lavender, sage, or clove oil, which could be swished or dabbed inside the mouth. In some cases, perfumed cloths were sucked like lozenges, leaving your breath smelling like a garden and your tongue slightly numb. It didn't stop the decay, of course, but it distracted from it. And here's the twist: bad teeth weren't necessarily unattractive. In some cases, they were even seen as charming quirks. There are love poems describing a lady's mischievous gap or playful crooked grin. One French knight even described his lover's missing teeth as evidence of her passion, romantic or just coping. Still, there were limits. Too many missing teeth, and your options dwindled. Some women resorted to false teeth, primitive dentures carved from bone, ivory, or even wood. They were uncomfortable, obvious, and often fell out mid-conversation. But if you were at a feast and your gums looked too empty, a tooth insert could be the difference between suitor and solitude. As for dental surgery, let's just not. Tooth extraction was performed with pliers. No anesthesia. If a tooth hurt too much, it was pulled. If your jaw swelled up afterward, you prayed it was just infection and not the plague. Dental professionals existed. They were called barber surgeons, which should tell you everything you need to know. These were the same people who cut your hair, set your bones, and occasionally bled you with leeches. In short, if your medieval beauty routine reached your mouth, you were either brave or extremely committed. But let's be fair, today isn't perfect either. Modern smiles are straightened with metal brackets, bleached with UV lamps, and filled with porcelain. We floss, we rinse, we panic over coffee stains, all in the name of a perfect, sparkling smile. Is it better? Sure. Is it less weird? Not always. You lean back in your upright bed, now fully powdered, perfumed, and parched, and wonder how many medieval women quietly dreaded the next feast. Not for the food, but for the pressure to open their mouths without terrifying the bishop. You exhale. Minty maybe, rotten probably, but you're here. You're radiant. And your teeth, what's left of them, are nobody's business. Unless, of course, you fall in love. Then good luck. You're nearly complete now. Your skin glows with deadly whiteness. Your lips are sweet with clove and crushed berries. And your long, perfumed neck glistens like a devotional candle. You look like you've walked straight out of a tapestry. But then you notice something small, dark, and stubborn. A mole, a freckle, perhaps even a wart. And for a split second, your beauty teeters. Because in the strange and contradictory world of medieval aesthetics, blemishes were either flirtatious ornaments or signs of your pact with Satan. It really depended on the day. Let's start with the romantic version. In certain courts, especially in Renaissance Italy and France, a small mole or dark freckle near the lip, cheek, or temple was sometimes seen as charming. A beauty spot, if you will. Think of it as the medieval prototype of Marilyn Monroe's famous mark. If positioned just right and small enough, it added character, mystery, proof that your face was real, not painted onto a saint statue. Some women even faked them. That's right, artificial beauty marks. Using a bit of charcoal or powdered soot mixed with grease or wax, women would dot their cheeks with tiny, deliberate smudges. These were called mousses in later centuries. But the practice dates back to much earlier times. A strategically placed mark could distract from a pimple, cover a scar, or just give your otherwise eerily symmetrical face a bit of flair. They were sometimes shaped into stars, hearts, or crescent moons. If you're thinking that sounds surprisingly modern, you're right. Fashion, as always, loops around like a poorly hemmed cloak. But this was only one side of the blemish coin, because while the occasional freckle might be cute, too many spots, too large a mole, a wart in the wrong place that could doom you. Literally, enter the devil's mark. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially during witch hunting hysteria, any unusual skin feature was fair game for suspicion. Moles, birthmarks, and warts were thought to be brands from the devil. Given during a witch's initiation, people actually believed that Satan licked, clawed, or burned his followers, leaving behind these dark blemishes as proof of their unholy alliance. Yes, your slightly raised mole could be Exhibit A in a heresy trial. If accused, women were stripped, examined, and interrogated about every spot on their bodies. Did it bleed when pricked? Did it cause pain? Was it numb? If the answer was no, and it often was, because skin is weird, then congratulations, you were officially cursed. Even when not accused of witchcraft, facial imperfections could be a social problem. A large mole on the wrong part of the face might suggest illness, poor breeding, or hot blood. Warts were associated with toads, and toads with witches, and witches with plagues. See how fast the logic spirals. It didn't matter how gorgeous your neck was if your chin had an unfortunate lump. Your fate could shift in an instant. So what could you do? Well, hide them, obviously. If your blemish was small, you might cover it with chalk, powder, or even a dab of white lead. If it was larger, you might turn it into an intentional mark of beauty. But for truly troublesome spots, some women took more drastic action, burning, slicing, or poisoning the blemish off the skin. Recipes existed for wart removers using vinegar and arsenic. One cure involved crushing dried toads and mixing them with lye. Another involved onion juice, sulfur, and fasting while praying to Saint Apollonia. Needless to say, dermatology was not yet a science. The most desperate even sought help from barber surgeons, who could lance, cut, or cauterize problem spots. With no anesthesia, in a dirty room, using tools that may have just been used on someone's thigh bone. The price of clear skin infection, scarring, or tetanus. And of course, none of this stopped blemishes from happening in the first place. Sunscreen didn't exist. Neither did antibiotics. So blemishes from acne to boils were just part of life. The average face was a roadmap of pimples, scars, spots, and stress. And yet, beauty standards continued to insist that you resemble a freshly glazed statue. The contradiction was cruel but familiar, because once again, medieval beauty wasn't about nature. It was about illusion. It was about proving you were clean, pure, and untouched, even as your body betrayed you. And when nature failed, you turned to powders, potions, and prayers. And you sit now, upright in your medieval bed, running a finger across your temple. There's a bump there. You're not sure what it is. In your century, it's nothing. In theirs, it might have changed your life. You feel for it again, then shrug. After everything, after the hairline plucking, the foot binding, the wine mouthwash and chalk dust, you realize this was always the truth. No one really met the standard. Not fully. Not forever. Everyone faked it. Everyone hid the cracks. Even you. And somewhere, in the flickering shadows of the candlelit hall, a lady with a wart on her chin laughed, danced, and got married to a man with terrible breath and a powdered wig. Because blemishes fade, but stories don't. You inhale through your chalk-dusted, perfumed mouth and realize something's blocking the breeze. Your nose. Yes, the medieval nose. Proud, prominent, perfectly positioned in the center of your painted face like a banner on a battlefield. You reach up, trace its bridge, and pause. Is it too large, too flat, too crooked? In the modern world, noses often fall victim to plastic surgery fantasies. But in the Middle Ages, the nose had an entirely different cultural standing. Depending on the time and place, it was considered either a symbol of nobility and intelligence or a suspicious bump on the face of a heretic. Let's explore that contradiction, shall we? To begin, in much of medieval Europe, particularly during the Gothic and early Renaissance periods, a prominent nose, especially a straight, aquiline one, was seen as a mark of refinement. Think of all those noble profiles carved into cathedral walls or illustrated in books of hours. Their noses aren't dainty. They're architectural. They suggest strength, wisdom, and lineage. Because yet, noses were political. A large, straight nose hinted at Roman ancestry, something the nobility loved to claim, especially in Italy and southern France. Roman statues and busts were venerated as ideals, and those statues had big, bold noses. If your profile happened to match a marble Caesar's, that wasn't just luck, that was destiny. Even physiognomy, the charming medieval pseudoscience of face reading, got involved. Books on the subject claimed that a long, pointed nose meant a person was clever, calm, and possibly noble. A flat or upturned nose, watch out. That suggested impulsiveness, possibly peasantry, maybe even thievery. You begin to understand why medieval portraits often exaggerate noses, why lovers wrote sonnets about a lady's graceful bridge, or why knights might compare a beloved's nose to a tower of ivory. Yes, that's a real metaphor someone wrote. And no, they weren't being sarcastic. And yet, this wasn't universal. In other regions, especially in England and parts of the Holy Roman Empire, smaller, more refined noses were sometimes preferred for women. This led to interesting compromises. Some ladies would pinch the bridge of their noses daily, hoping to reshape the cartilage over time. Others smeared strange concoctions over their noses, paste made from vinegar, chalk, and herbs, believing it might smooth or narrow the shape. Spoiler, it didn't. But noses weren't just judged on size, they were judged on color. A red nose, scandalous. Why? Because red or swollen noses were associated with drunkenness? Or worse, syphilis. A flushed, bulbous nose might be the result of too much wine. Or a dark, medieval secret your chambermaid whispered about in the halls. Even if your flush came from innocent rosacea or cold weather, it could mark you as a moral failure. So what did people do? They powdered it heavily. Some recipes even included alum, astringents, and ground herbs to cool the skin and reduce redness. One guide advised women to bathe the face in goat's milk and ash to calm inflammation. Did it work? Possibly, but mostly it just made you smell like cheese and firewood. And speaking of smell, yes, noses had a sensory role in beauty too. A lady with a refined nose was believed to have refined taste. She would be more sensitive to perfumes, to incense in the chapel, to the scent of flowers at court. A sensitive nose meant a sensitive soul. Conversely, someone who couldn't smell beauty properly was considered spiritually dull. In an era without deodorant, that might have been a survival mechanism more than a romantic ideal. Noses also became tied to ethnicity, and here's where things get uncomfortable. As anti-Semitic beliefs spread in medieval Europe, some people began associating certain nose shapes with Jewishness, which was weaponized as a visual shorthand for the other. Artists and chroniclers often exaggerated the noses of people they wanted to villainize. These stereotypes laid the groundwork for centuries of prejudice and caricature. It's a reminder that medieval beauty standards weren't just silly or strange. Sometimes, they were dangerous. But let's return to your own reflection. You, lying upright in your bedchamber, neck swanned, lips tinted, and nose whatever it may be silhouetted in the candlelight. You think about all the meanings that little bump of bone and cartilage once carried. How much was projected onto it? How many people pinched, powdered, or praised theirs into submission? And yet, here you are, unchanged. Your nose is still yours. And maybe, after all this, you see it not as a flaw or a feature, but as a survivor. A tiny architectural protest against the idea that you should ever have looked like anyone else. You inhale again, still here, still noble, even without the goat milk. So far, we've spent most of the evening adjusting your forehead, vanishing your eyebrows, chalking your veins, bleaching your hair, and polishing your upper-class toes, but now it's time to take a step back and ask, what about the men? Surely, in an age when beauty could kill you, and probably would, men were exempt from this madness. Right. Not quite. In fact, the beauty standards for medieval men were just as performative, just as high maintenance, and every bit as bizarre. They just involved fewer tweezers and more scented gloves. Let's begin at the top, the hair. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially among the nobility, long, wavy hair was the gold standard. Not shoulder-length casual waves. Mind you, we're talking full, flowing, shampoo commercial-level locks. Think King Arthur fan fiction meets Fabio in a monastery. Hair was expected to be shiny, thick, and groomed into soft curls that practically screamed, "I own land and cry at poetry." Men often curled their hair using heated rods, wrapped it around cloth overnight, or braided it while damp to produce those effortless ringlets. Of course, none of it was actually effortless. If your hair wouldn't curl naturally, you made it curl through smoke, steam, or prayer. You could even apply sweet-smelling oils like rosemary, bay, or lavender to scent it, which had the dual effect of masking the sweat of being wrapped in 30 pounds of wool armor. And if your hairline began to recede, well, that's unfortunate. But wigs weren't quite the rage yet, so you compensated in other ways, like with your codpiece. Ah yeah, the codpiece, that ridiculous, pouch-like garment that covered and emphasized the male groin. It began as a practical fix designed to close the gap left by very tight hose, but quickly morphed into a flamboyant fashion statement. Some were padded, some were stuffed, some were shaped into the kind of geometry that would confuse Euclid. And by the 15th century, codpieces were embroidered, perfumed, and sized for intimidation. You didn't just wear a codpiece, you announced it. But let's not get distracted by the lower hemisphere. There was much more going on above the belt. Take complexion, for example. Men were also expected to have clear, fair skin, but not too pale. Pale skin still suggested wealth and education, but a man was supposed to appear outdoorsy enough to lead a hunt or go to war. The ideal look, think sun-kissed prince who reads Latin and also owns dogs. A little color in the cheeks was acceptable. Dirt under the nails, absolutely not. Noblemen kept their hands clean, their faces smooth at least until beards became fashionable, and their appearance meticulously curated. And yes, men wore makeup too. Light powders were sometimes applied to remove shine. Herbs like mallow or lily root were used to reduce blemishes. Some even rubbed their faces with wool soaked in wine to refresh the skin, which sounds less like skincare and more like exfoliating with a bar brawl. Let's move on to scent. In the medieval world, perfume was power. Noblemen carried pomanders small, ball-shaped containers filled with aromatic herbs and resins on chains or tucked inside their sleeves. These little scent bombs masked body odor, medieval hygiene being inconsistent and broadcasted wealth and sophistication. Gloves, in particular, became a status symbol. Not because they kept your hands warm, but because they were scented. Men would rub their gloves with perfumes made from musk, civet, ambergris, or floral oils. The result: when you kissed a nobleman's hand or slapped someone with a glove in a duel, it left behind a whisper of lavender and implied superiority. Let's not forget clothing. A fashionable man wore tight hose, doublets that emphasized the chest, and surcoats with dramatic sleeves that flapped like banners. Shoulder pads weren't a 1980s invention, they existed in the 1400s, in the form of stiff, padded jackets meant to create a V-shaped broad shoulders. narrow waist, and a sense that this man could joust and do basic arithmetic. But again, beauty was not universal. While French and Italian men prized the poetic, scented, courtly look, English knights often preferred ruggedness. A scar from battle attractive, a limp possibly romantic, hair slightly tousled from removing your helmet after winning a tournament swoon. Still, even the roughest warrior was expected to clean up for court, and heaven help the man with bad breath. Like women, men chewed herbs, rinsed with wine, and even scrubbed their teeth with gritty pastes. A foul mouth could ruin a marriage proposal, a diplomatic meeting, or a song recital. Since musical performance was a surprisingly common male talent at court, lutes and lyres were great for wooing, less so when paired with garlic breath and plaque. So what does this all mean? That beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't just for women. Men were under constant pressure to appear strong but refined, fierce but fragrant, noble but humble. Their bodies, too, were canvases painted, powdered, scented, and shaped by expectation. And perhaps most fascinating, male beauty was allowed to be vain. In fact, it was encouraged. Grooming was a symbol of power, self-respect, and divine order. A well-dressed man was honoring God by honoring the body God gave him, especially if he also happened to own half of Burgundy. You sit now, upright as ever, imagining a room full of men in silk hose and rose-scented gloves, reciting Petrarch while adjusting their codpieces. You picture one struggling to keep his curls in place during a duel, another nervously dabbing wine behind his ears before a dance. They're trying just as hard as the ladies and failing just as frequently. And you smile, because beauty, it seems, is a battlefield for everyone. And the scent of lavender only masks so much. You've primped and powdered, perfumed and postured. You've curled your hair, lengthened your neck, hidden your blemishes, and maybe even fallen asleep sitting up with a lead-based face mask cracking gently in the candlelight. But just as you're feeling confident, ready to stroll into court, glowing like a blessed marble statue, someone leans over and whispers, "You look too beautiful." Because in the Middle Ages, being too beautiful could get you in serious trouble. Yes, beauty was celebrated, worshipped, even, but it was also feared. And just beneath the polished surface of every medieval beauty standard lay a churning anxiety about vanity, temptation, control, and sin, especially if you were a woman. Let's start with the basics. In many religious writings, beauty was tied directly to morality. A beautiful person was assumed to be good, virtuous, and favored by God. This belief stretched back to classical times but was given a particularly Christian twist: a luminous, symmetrical face, a sign of divine order. Graceful features, the mark of a pure soul. Smooth skin and big eyes, probably chaste. Maybe even saintly. You see it in saints' lives, paintings, sermons. Beauty equals holiness. But here's the medieval twist the devil noticed, too. According to theologians, Satan could not create, but he could imitate. He could use beauty as a trap. A beautiful face, they warned, might not be a sign of virtue, it might be a mask for sin. Some went further: a woman who was too beautiful, or too conscious of her appearance, was said to be working with the devil, or at least making his job easier. You sit upright in your bed now, thinking, but I just like my blue vein powder and my delicate rouge. And that's exactly the problem. Because for many medieval moralists, female beauty was suspicious by default. Did you spend hours grooming sin of vanity? Wear perfume, sin of pride. Catch the eye of a monk who later couldn't concentrate on his prayers. That was your fault. Some went even further. In one widely circulated 13th century sermon, women were warned that each time they looked in a mirror, the devil looked over their shoulder and took notes. A fashionable woman wasn't just vain, she was dangerous. This is where things got darker, witch hunt dark. As fear of heresy and witchcraft spread across Europe in the late Middle Ages, beauty became one of the red flags. Accused witches were often described as strikingly attractive or oddly youthful for their age. Their glowing skin, a gift from Satan. Their perfume, a glamour spell. That perfect hairline, probably enchanted by moonlight and frog parts. And their seductive power, a threat to the very moral fabric of Christendom. One moment you're applying beetroot to your lips. The next, you're being dunked in a river to see if you float. But here's where things get hilariously hypocritical. Men still wanted women to be beautiful. Poets wrote endlessly about golden hair, delicate ankles, rosy cheeks. Knights risked their lives for the favor of fair maidens. Courtly love, the entire cultural movement, was built on idealizing female beauty while simultaneously warning women not to enjoy their own reflection too much. You were supposed to be beautiful, but not know it. You could enhance your looks just a little, but if it looked like you tried, it was suddenly prideful. The ideal woman was accidentally perfect. She tripped into divine beauty while making soup and praying for the plague to go away. And this applied across classes. A peasant girl who appeared too polished might be accused of trying to marry above her station, of using unnatural means to lure a man. A noblewoman who showed off her face at the wrong time could be told she was inviting sin just by existing. This led to some truly baffling contradictions. Church leaders told women not to show their hair, but also praised them for its beauty. They said to dress modestly, but also to represent their husband's wealth with fine garments. They preached humility, then married off their nieces to men who wanted girls who looked like living saints. And through all of it, women walked a razor's edge between admiration and accusation. Of course, some resisted. There were women who leaned into the aesthetic while quietly rolling their eyes. They applied rose water behind closed doors, whispered beauty recipes to their daughters, painted their lips a little redder, and just dared someone to accuse them of sorcery. Because even in a world where beauty could burn you at the stake, it still offered power. You sit now, upright in your medieval bed, layered in linens, hands folded across your stomach, and think how exhausting it must have been. To chase a standard that changed with the wind, to perfect an illusion that could be praised one moment and punished the next. You glance toward the mirror, the polished metal one, warped and glowing by firelight. You see a face not of perfection, but of strategy. A person who has mastered the rules, walked the tightrope, and survived the contradictions. A person who knows that beauty in the Middle Ages was never just about looking good. It was about being believed. You take a deep breath, not too deep, of course, or you'll inhale chalk and look back on your entire medieval makeover. It's been intense. Your forehead has been plucked into oblivion. Your skin is bleached and veined. Your lips burn faintly with berry and vinegar concoctions. Your feet are shoved into shoes that could double as medieval weapons. You're sitting upright, wrapped like a decorative mummy, glowing softly in candlelight, and beginning to realize a rather bleak truth. Beauty didn't just hurt. In the Middle Ages, beauty could kill you. Let's go back through the list. Start with lead-based cosmetics. Used liberally in face powders, creams, and whitening pastes. White lead was the go-to substance for achieving that noble, marble complexion. It smoothed over blemishes. It created the appearance of youthful radiance. It also absorbed directly into your skin, entered your bloodstream, and began the slow process of systemic poisoning. Symptoms included hair loss, tooth decay, stomach pain, seizures, and eventually, death. And yet it was prized for centuries. Not just because it worked, but because it worked visibly. People saw the pale glow and assumed wealth, grace, and holiness. No one saw the organ failure happening quietly beneath the powder. Then there's mercury, which was sometimes mixed into skin-lightening pastes or spot treatments. Mercury gave a lustrous, smooth appearance right before it made you shake uncontrollably and go blind. Still feeling brave? Let's talk belladonna. Italian women used drops of belladonna extract, literally beautiful lady, to dilate their pupils. Wide, dark pupils were considered romantic and mysterious. In portraits, it made them look dreamy and soft-focused. In reality, belladonna is highly toxic, and prolonged use could cause blurred vision, light sensitivity, and permanent blindness. But hey, who needs eyesight when you've got allure? And don't forget about hair treatments. As we covered earlier, blonde hair was the holy grail. Achieving it involved soaking your head in a mix of lye, sulfur, alum, and occasionally urine, then sitting in the sun until your scalp begged for mercy. Burns were common, sores were frequent, and infections. Let's just say antibiotics were not yet trending. People quite literally cooked their scalps in the name of fashion. Then there were the tools. Tweezers and scrapers were used to pluck hair, shape brows, and expand foreheads. These weren't sleek, stainless steel instruments. They were often iron, brass, or bone, and shared among women. Infections, absolutely. Tetanus, possibly. But at least your hairline could rival a cathedral's arch. There's even evidence that some women used heated stones or knives to smooth their skin by removing small imperfections, essentially cauterizing their faces. You think of modern chemical peels, and suddenly they feel like luxury spa days in comparison. And yet, despite the danger, these methods weren't just accepted, they were admired, praised, passed down like sacred rituals. Because in a world where marriage was survival, appearance was everything. Beauty wasn't about vanity, it was about access to protection, to privilege, to safety. The irony, even not trying could be dangerous. If a noble woman appeared too plain, too freckled, too sun-darkened, or too undone, her value dropped. She could be passed over for marriage, mocked by her peers, or accused of sloth, poverty, or moral failing. Her family's reputation could suffer. Her future could vanish. In some cases, her lack of beauty was seen as defiance, especially if she dared to embrace it. So, the options were simple: risk slow death or social extinction. It's no wonder that women, even when they knew the risks, kept reaching for the lead pot. When your fate hangs on your face, a little poison seems manageable. And men weren't immune either. We've talked about their perfumes, their pomanders, their codpieces stuffed like Christmas geese. But they also burned incense in their clothes, causing skin rashes. They dyed their beards with copper salts, which corroded the skin. They wore armor so tight it reshaped their torsos and collapsed their posture, all in the name of appearing broad-chested and heroic. So yes, beauty hurt everyone. And yet, it persisted. Because underneath all the superstition and pseudoscience, beauty gave people something rare in the medieval world: control. You couldn't stop a plague. You couldn't escape your birth class. You couldn't predict if your crops would survive, or if your king would go to war, or if a neighboring lord would set your village on fire just for sport. But you could shape your appearance. You could bleach, paint, perfume, and pluck yourself into something beautiful, into something admired, into someone who might be safe for another season. And maybe, just maybe, that made the pain worth it. You sit now upright, aching, possibly glowing with arsenic, and think about all the little things women and men did to look like they belonged. The layers, the effort, the risk. You see their faces in your mind, not perfect, but trying, always trying. You see them, and in some strange way, you understand them, because we still do it too. Maybe not with belladonna and burnt eyebrows, but with filters, surgeries, gym routines, $80 creams, and 20-step skincare systems. We chase the glow, we pay the price, we say it's for us, but it's never just for us. So next time someone says, beauty is pain, tell them that's not a metaphor. Tell them it's history. You sit there now, fully transformed, or maybe fully unmade beneath a medieval canopy of linen and shadows. Your body stiff from posture, your face ghostly with powder, and your brain full of belladonna and moral contradictions. You've done it. You've worn the beauty standards of the Middle Ages like a second skin. And now, at the end of this long, perfumed, chalk-dusted journey, you're left with one final question. Were they insane? It's tempting to think so. From our modern view, medieval beauty seems absurd. Self-mutilation with tweezers, skin whitening with poison, hair bleach made of urine, rouge from crushed insects and sheep parts. tiny shoes, missing eyebrows, painted on veins, and, of course, the deeply unsettling belief that being too beautiful might get you praised or drowned depending on the season. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You do the same thing. Not you personally, perhaps, but your world, your generation. You just swapped out the arsenic for retinol, the plucked forehead for Botox, the codpiece for shapewear, and the chalk dust for setting powder. The methods have changed. The message hasn't. You still believe beauty means goodness. Still associate youth with value. Still market serums with words like pure, clean, angelic. Still whisper that too much makeup is vain, but not enough is careless. Still tell women to be effortlessly attractive and completely unaware of it. Still pressure men to be sculpted, rugged, and scented just the right kind of scented. We still stare into our mirrors modern, polished, backlit and ask, do I belong? The medieval mirror was warped, burnished bronze, but the question was the same. And yet, despite the parallels, there's also something oddly admirable about the medieval pursuit of beauty. It was a commitment, a performance, a ritual, a way of surviving in a world filled with pain, plague, and unpredictability, where famine could arrive with the morning fog, and the king might change the law on a whim. People still reached for rouge, still curled their hair, still powdered their necks and painted blue veins, and wrote poems about the curve of someone's jaw as if it meant something eternal. Because maybe it did. Maybe, for them, beauty wasn't just about approval. Maybe it was about order. In a time when chaos ruled, the human face was one of the only things you could sculpt. To paint your face, style your hair, walk with swan-like grace, it was a form of defiance, of structure, of art. They turned themselves into saints, angels, lovers, icons, not because they thought they were divine, but because the act of trying made life feel a little less grim. And that's not so different from you. You filter your selfies not to lie, but to dream. You buy moisturizer not because you're ashamed, but because ritual gives you control. You go to the gym not just for abs, but for rhythm, for process, for hope. And sure, you don't paint on veins, but don't tell me you've never Googled dewy skin. You lie back now, just slightly reclined for the first time all night. Your medieval bed creaks gently. The fire is low. Your face itches faintly under all the powder, and you smile. Because this story, the strange, dangerous, brilliant, bizarre history of beauty isn't just about the past. It's about you, and all the people who came before you, trying desperately, creatively, sometimes tragically to be noticed, to be wanted, to feel safe, to feel loved. In the end, beauty may be ridiculous, but it's also human, and that makes it kind of beautiful after all. So now, as the fire burns low and the candle gutters beside your bed, you sit, or rather, still sit upright in a room full of ghosts. Not spooky ones, but powdered ones, painted ones. People who spend entire lifetimes trying to master the art of not being themselves. And you've been on a journey through every eyebrowless portrait, every poisoned powder box, every perfumed glove and cursed codpiece. You've plucked, powdered, painted, pinched, and probably lost a few IQ points to lead dust along the way. You've walked in poulains so long they could double as fencing foils. You've smiled through beet-paste lips. You've stretched your neck like a proud giraffe wearing a rosary. All for one purpose: to understand the bizarre, terrifying, magnificent pageant of medieval beauty. And now, as you tuck yourself under a mountain of linen and gently suffocate beneath the moral weight of historical fashion, a strange thing happens. You feel comforted, because for all its madness, all its contradictions, and all its painful sacrifices, beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't shallow. It wasn't about vanity, not entirely. It was about meaning, about survival, about telling the world I am valuable, I am visible, I belong. You've heard that phrase before, haven't you? In your world, Beauty is still currency, still power, still a kind of performance just digitized now, sharpened into pixels and hashtags and filtered sunbeams. You don't pluck your forehead, but you shape your image. You edit, you curate. You sit under different kinds of artificial light and wonder if your reflection will keep you safe, or loved, or respected. Sound familiar? Yes. The tools are different, but the need is eternal. You may laugh at the woman painting veins on her chest while squinting into a brass mirror, but she might look at your contour kit and ring light and do the same. You might scoff at the nobleman spritzing rose water onto his gloves. But have you seen your bathroom shelf? His mystery fragrance is your $80 cologne with notes of sandalwood and existential dread. And really, is a codpiece so different from modern fashion's obsession with statement pieces? It's easy to judge the past, to smirk at their powdered faces and dangerous tinctures and obsession with visible bones. But they were just people trying, failing, and occasionally catching fire from their own hair bleach. People who wanted to be beautiful, not because they were vain, but because beauty was a story they could control. In a world of disease, war, and divine punishment, beauty was the one place they could carve out space, paint order onto their skin, define their own worth, however briefly, with rouge and ribbons and a really unfortunate nose. And the best part, they knew it was performative. They weren't fooled. They didn't believe their beetroot lipstick would change their soul. They just hoped it would buy them time to marry, to move up, to survive. So when you wake tomorrow and reach for your moisturizer or your mascara or your favorite hoodie that makes you feel like you have it together, don't roll your eyes at yourself. You're doing what they did. You're trying to look like you have control in a world that's rarely controllable. You're painting your version of safety, of comfort, of this is me, only slightly improved. And that's okay. In fact, it's ancient. And for those who didn't fit the mold, those with the wrong skin, the wrong body, the wrong features, they too made art out of defiance. They mocked the rules, bent the rituals, created new ideals. Not everyone in medieval Europe was a chalk-faced noble with a 3-foot forehead. Most people were not, and still, they played the game, or resisted it, or rewrote it in small, silent ways. Somewhere, in a back alley of Florence or a tiny village outside Rouen, a woman wore her natural skin tone with pride. Somewhere else, a man refused to perfume his gloves and still found love in the candlelight. Somewhere, a freckled girl laughed too loud at a feast, and someone thought she was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. Because beauty, even when it's weaponized, isn't only a weapon, it's also a connection, a signal, a whisper of humanity in a world that doesn't always listen. You turn over now, finally reclining properly in your medieval bed, stiff sheets crackling, hair rustling against the pillow like hay. You think of the people who lived and died by beauty's cruel, glittering sword, and you whisper a thank you. Thank you for being absurd. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for smearing berries on your face and calling it a revolution. And thank you for reminding us that even when beauty is ridiculous, it's also real. Because it's never about just looking good. It's about being seen. Good night, powdered angels. Sleep tight. Rouge-smeared ghosts. And if you wake in the morning and your mirror doesn't love you, just remember, you'd be an absolute icon in 1452.